Hello everyone, it's been a hot minute since I did a future URs video, so I'm back with the next one. This time, cruisers, the backbone of the fleet. They escort your convoys, screen your carriers and bombard your enemies. Honestly, you can't go wrong with them. The usual disclaimers apply. Since I'm trying to be as exhaustive as possible, expect lots of paper ships. In addition, I'm a little out of my depth here. I like big boats and I cannot lie, so my knowledge on cruisers is a little limited. There's also a lot of cruisers, so if you think there's any I missed, especially from a history perspective, let me know. Anyway, enough preamble, let's get started. Opening us up is the Eagle Union with their Des Moines class heavy cruisers. The Des Moines class were an enlarged improvement to the Baltimore class, with improved machinery layout and anti-aircraft battery of new twin 76mm guns, after the Quad 40 Bofors was found to be increasingly inadequate. Of course, this is window dressing to the main attraction, the new Mark 16 guns. These featured an autoloader, giving them a rate of fire that rivaled light cruiser guns. The ships would see service until around 1960, with the exception of Newport News, who would be decommissioned in the mid-70s. 3 ships of this class were built, the name ship Des Moines, Salem, and Newport News. A 4th, Dallas, was cancelled partway through its construction, and the other 8 planned ships did not receive names. Salem is currently in service as a museum ship. Their light cruiser cousins are the Worcester class, and are kind of emerging between the 2 types of light cruisers the USN operated. Their general design is an AA cruiser, but they carried a 12-gun battery of full-size cruiser guns like the Clevelands and Fargos, as opposed to the destroyer guns found on the Junos and Atlantas. The new 152mm, 6-inch guns, were the first dual-purpose gun above destroyer caliber, but were not truly automatic, just fast enough to be AAA. They also proved problematic, not likely helped by their stop-start development. Entering service after the war, they would serve a decade before decommissioning in 1958, the advent of missiles making them obsolete in the air defence role. Out of 10 planned ships, 2 were built, Worcester herself and Roanoke. A 3rd, Vallejo, was cancelled during construction, and the 4th, Gary, didn't even get that far. The biggest of the bunch are Guam sisters in the Alaska class. These large cruisers were built to combat the threat of the Deutschland class and the B-65 cruiser killers, as well as the Scharnhorst battle cruisers. To that end, they were given significant protection for a cruiser, and their 305mm, 12-inch guns. Unfortunately, despite their capabilities, they were built to combat a threat that didn't really exist by the time they were in service, leading to painfully short careers of just 3 years for Alaska and Guam, the only 2 of the 6 that were completed. Hawaii was near completion, and the USN ummed and ahed over what they should do with her, before she eventually got scrapped. The Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Samoa weren't so lucky. Reaching into the never built, the CL-154. The final attempt to make a Super Atlanta as a contemporary to the Worcester class. Armed with a new 54 caliber version of the 127mm guns and 76mm AA. Pretty speedy too at 34.5 knots. 6 hull numbers from 154 to 159 were allocated, but no ships were laid down. For a final wildcard, Helena II, the Baltimore class heavy cruiser. This one's a little weird. So far we have 2 Type 2s that have previously had retrofits, and both have been a rarity tier higher than those retrofits. However, both were special cases, as Langley retrofit was rare, below the lowest rarity in events these days, and Laffey 2 is also higher because of her history. Helena herself did some flagship stuff and bombardment in Korea and afterwards, but that's about it. Her ship's motto of proud and fearless would be a nice cap to a character arc though. Crossing the Atlantic to the Royal Navy, we open with the Minotaur class, the one from 1947, not the one that got renamed Swiftsure class. Much like the US, the Royal Navy was looking to embrace multi-role supremacy in its light cruisers with this design. The Minotaur class is like taking Belfast and Dido, slapping a polymerization on them and giving the result automatic cruiser caliber guns. These guns had over double the fire rate compared to its predecessor, so while the Minotaurs only had 10 guns compared to the 12 on most Royal Navy standard cruisers, its firepower surpassed them. These would be supplemented by 8 twin 76mm AA guns co-developed with the US, and 4 quadruple racks of torpedoes. Due to the lack of immediate threat and the British post-war economy, or lack thereof, the ships were cancelled, though there was an attempt to revive it in response to the Soviets' Redlov class. 6 were planned, reusing names from the cancelled Neptune class, those being Minotaur, Neptune, Centurion, Edgar, Mars, and Bellerophon. So a Type 2 for Neptune could be in the cards. While the Minotaurs ended up on the cutting room floor, the guns would find their way onto the Tiger class. Tiger class were 3 Swiftsure class cruisers that had their construction suspended by the end of World War II. By 1954, construction had recommenced following a redesign. They remained small ships, now armed with 2 twin 152mm turrets and 3 twin 76s. Intended as an interim AA cruiser until the County-class missile destroyers entered service, they would serve for 20 years until 1979. I mentioned earlier that there were 3, however I'm choosing to ignore Lion because that's a battleship, silly. Tiger and Blake are still okay though. No idea how you'd implement them since they lack torpedoes or secondary guns. A third Oxlot, perhaps? So that's light cruisers. What about big gun cruisers? Did the Royal Navy have any that are UR worthy? Well, yes. The RN was actually looking into heavy cruiser designs during the Second World War. It's these designs that gave us Drake and Cheshire. Among them was a few designs with 234mm guns in triple or quadruple turrets, as well as a couple ships equipped with larger guns. However, the final design was essentially a British Baltimore, and since AL doesn't really do alternative designs unless we're stealing them in a World of Warships collab, they're largely off the table, at least for now. They would have been the best heavy cruiser in the Royal Navy, but it's kinda hard to call an unbuilt British Baltimore equivalent a UR. Heading far east to the Sakura Empire, we have the design B-65 large cruisers. These were intended to replace the Congo class in the night battle force as cruiser killers to facilitate torpedo attacks on enemy battle lines. 2 ships were ordered under the Circle 5 rearmament plan and given numbers 795 and 796, with a further 4 in Circle 6. The end result would have been a ship that looked like Yamato's teenage daughter, intended to run down cruisers at 34 knots and smash them with its 310mm guns. With war looming, the initial 2 ships were delayed in order to complete the previous shipbuilding programs, and as it began in earnest, the delay would become indefinite. The decisive research ship Azuma is a representation of this design. Scaling down somewhat is the 1941 Type A heavy cruisers from the Circle 6 shipbuilding plan, Unzen and her sisters. Since Japan destroyed most information regarding future warships, as they were losing, not a whole lot is known. Seriously, it was an endeavour to find out what we now know about the Yamatos and their development, so we're pretty SOL for anything unbuilt. What we do know is as follows: 12 203mm guns in new triple mounts, to be protected against said guns and to sail at a top speed of 35 knots. Up to 8 were planned, but I've only ever heard names for 3, those being Senjo, Zhao, and the aforementioned Unzen. The World of Warships might have something to do with that. Venturing back into real steel, we have the great shippost herself, Kitakami. Kitakami started her life as a Kuma-class light cruiser, before receiving special modifications to become a torpedo cruiser in 1941. This modification armed them with a ridiculous 10 quadruple racks of torpedoes, allowing her to carry a total of 40 long lances, with 20 on each side. Her sister ship, Oi, also received these modifications, though both would have 4 racks removed and would spend most of the war acting as transports. I really want to see what kind of torpedo memes Vanguard you can make with Kita, Unzen and Shimakaze. You could also put the C-44 Agano Kais on here. These were a class of 5 ships designed as upgraded Aganos, featuring an extra turret and stronger engines to increase their top speed beyond the original Agano's 35 knots. We have 3 of the 4 original Aganos in game, and 2 of them, Noshiro and Sakawa, are already SRs, so these straight upgrades could be URs, even if an 8 152mm gun light cruiser this high is questionable. On to the Ironbud, with Vice Admiral Hans Zenker's 1928 battlecruiser design. This was intended to hunt down and sink treaty cruisers, with its 8 305mm guns and 34 knot speed. However, these 17,500 ton ships would be thinly armoured, the main bell only being around 100mm. So if she gets added, don't expect her to be as tanky as her gear. They would also require the Treaty of Versailles to be nullified in order to be built, and Zenker's constant yapping to get the Reichstag to negotiate this got him and his battlecruiser design told to pound sand. Beyond that, just copium, really. The Kriegsmarine cruiser doctrine was to smash them with panzer ships while raiding commerce, but the devs seem pretty keen on keeping the P-class as SRs. While them randomly making a UR1 is not completely out of the question, I don't think it's likely. The last two M-class light cruisers also had their design heavily modified to improve their cruiser range, so maybe those last two could get a rarity bump. And a few cruiser carrier abominations. I'm gonna be real, if Ironblood gets any other UR cruisers, it's gonna have to be through PR. But even then, your options are limited to a hypothetical AA cruiser or Hindenburg 2.0. Or an actual battle cruiser that gets lumped with normal cruisers for some fucking reason. Up next, the Irish Orthodoxy's De Grasse. De Grasse started life as a very different ship, being the lead ship in an improved La Galicienne class. Her construction was suspended during the war, and she was captured by the Germans, who at one point had planned to finish her as an aircraft carrier, though that fell through for various reasons. Eventually she would return to French hands, and in 1946 work would recommence, completing her as a vastly different AA cruiser that was commissioned a decade later following more pauses and the redesign. In the end, De Grasse would carry 16 127mm dual-purpose guns in 8 twin mounts, supplemented by a further 10 twin 57mm AA guns. She would serve until 1973, performing flagship duties for the Mediterranean Squad, before being transitioned to a nuclear testing flagship, participating in a total of 6 testing campaigns between 1966 and 72. In the post-war period, the French Navy wanted 6 conventional and 6 anti-aircraft cruisers, so they set about building more cruisers similar to the rebuild of De Grasse. In the end, this would become France's last cruiser, Colbert. Colbert was slightly smaller than her cousin, due in part to a slightly reduced speed and smaller hull. Everything else was similar, same guns, same radar suite, different turbines though. Following her commissioning in the late 50s, Colbert would go on to have a lengthy career, being retrofit into a missile cruiser, and serving all the way until 1991. Afterwards she would become a museum ship, but due to a lack of funding she would be scrapped in 2016. Interestingly, for us this would be Colbert 2, as there was another one before her, a Suffren class heavy cruiser, that was scuttled at Toulon. And hey, there's a reason to give her one right there. As for anything heavier, there is none. The St. Louis class were basically French Baltimores, so not really UR worthy, also not real. And despite what World of Warships keeps trying to tell us, there was no larger, faster development of the St. Louis's armed with 240mm guns. Where did they even find those? They could release Dunkirk's sister Strasbourg as a large cruiser, but let's be honest, that's not happening. Also, they already have Brest for that. Oh well. The Sardinians have more candidates than I anticipated, so let's start with the 1935 Marikominov studies. These were launched with the intention of countering the new French Dunkirk class. They were to be armed with a main battery of 320mm guns, with various layouts being proposed. From more conventional ones, to others resembling Nelson, a back-to-front King George V, or one by Admiral de Feo that had the main and secondary batteries in each other's locations. The studies were abandoned not long after. A Dunkirk counter is surprisingly redundant when you already have finalised designs for the Littorio class battleships. It should be noted that these were small battleships, not large cruisers, but it wouldn't be without precedent if AL implements them that way. In fact, we may even get one, Michelangelo, in the next PR season, though I'd prefer if we got Venezia instead. Give me thick pasta heavy cruiser Helena. On a related note, I really want to rip off those quad secondaries and stick them on a Zara hull or something. Scaling down a bit is the Ansaldo 1936 cruiser killer design. This was a cruiser being designed for the Soviets, either as or in parallel to Project 22. It kinda skirts the line between heavy and large cruisers. A 22,000-ton heavy cruiser armed with 9 250mm main guns, a 37-knot top speed, and thick armour by heavy cruiser standards. Not much to complicate things here. She's fast, she's well protected, and she has big guns. Give. Next is another Italian project for a foreign navy, this time Ansaldo's Super Washington cruisers, being drawn up for Spain. These were 16,000-ton ships designed to combat treaty cruisers. The designs came in 3 flavours, 4x2 203mm, 3x3 203mm, and 4x3 152mm. Beyond the main armament went everything else was the same, including a 150mm belt, 70mm deck, and 200,000 horsepower engine plant that propelled them to a speedy 37 knots. Personally leaning towards the 152 armed one myself, that would give us a very fast and well protected light cruisers for the Italians. On to the Soviets. Good lord, the Soviets. These guys had so goddamn many cruiser projects in and around the Second World War. Stalin had an obsession with a powerful Red Navy being built around big gun warships that had to fight on up to 4 different fronts, and that necessitated a lot of cruisers. So let's start with some real ones before we get too crazy. The Sverdlov class. These were the last conventional gun cruisers built for the Soviet Navy, and were an improved version of the preceding Chapayev class. The main armament, propulsion machinery and protection were the same, however they featured larger fuel capacity, improved anti-aircraft weaponry, greater torpedo armament and radar systems. When the design was improved in 1947, 30 were planned. But by the time Stalin had punched his ticket and construction was cancelled, 14 had been completed. They'd end up serving for quite some time, the final ship being stricken in 1992, though their growing obsolescence began to limit their roles. We're not likely to get all 14, especially as URs, but I think the name ships, Sverdlov, Mikhail Kutuzov, who's been preserved as a museum ship, as well as the Type 2s for Murmansk and Tallinn, would make a healthy selection. Next up, the remaining Kronstadt class. These are typically considered battle cruisers, but since AL has them armed with their original triple 305 guns, instead of the surplus German twin 380s acquired through the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, they're classified as large cruisers. The Kron's origins are the end result of a shitshow. Initially, the plan was for a 23,000-ton cruiser killer armed with 9 254mm 10-inch guns under Project 22. However, following the Anglo-Soviet Quantitative Naval Agreement, the Soviets pivoted to the Project 25 small battleships for service in the Baltic and Black Sea. Not long after they had ordered 4 of these ships, the Great Purge hit the Navy, and the designs were rejected for being weak compared to foreign designs. There was an attempt to upgun them, but in the end, the whole thing got axed. Under Project 69, the original cruiser killer concept was revived, but by then details about Germany's Scharnhorst class had become available, and they were redesigned around being able to fight the Scharnhorst and outrun the Bismarcks, giving us the Kronstadts we know. The initial order was for 16 of them, but the harsh realities of Soviet shipbuilding industry revised that to a final number of 2. In this case, the second ship would be a Type 2 for Sevastopol. Up next, their contemporary turned replacement, the Stalingrad class. Back in 1941, the Project 82 cruiser was envisioned as a fast, well-protected heavy cruiser meant to counter British cruiser forces. As the war carried on, and after it was over, the cruisers were redefined, becoming replacements to the Kronstadt class for a future fight with the Americans, and earning particular interest from Stalin himself, much to the dismay of the naval staff. After much redesign work, in no small part thanks to Stalin's personal vision for the ships, they were laid down in 1951. By then they had bloated to 36,500-ton monsters, armed with 9 powerful 62 caliber 305mm guns, a complex armour scheme and a monstrous 280,000 horsepower propulsion plant that pushed them to 35 knots. 4 were planned, though only 3 got laid down, being named Stalingrad and Moskva. There is some contention over whether the third one was named Kronstadt or Archangels. I'm choosing to go with the latter for this video for obvious reasons. In April 1953, work on all large warships was halted after the death of Stalin. Moskva and the 3rd were scrapped on the splitway, while Stalingrad was sank as a target hulk. Following the Second World War and the Stalingrad stepping up to fill the Kronstadt's shoes, new heavy cruisers were needed to combat the US's massive cruiser fleet. As such, the heavy cruiser designs for smaller alternatives to the Stalingrads were pushed under Project 66. After some Soviet political tomfoolery, the design work was approved, and even continued post-cancellation of their bigger contemporaries, with the intention of countering the Des Moines class. However, they ended up being rejected, as their size and displacement was too large for a ship of their strength. The ship was designed around 9 220mm 65 caliber guns, developed initially for the Stalingrads, and were decently fast and protected, though how well they'd hold up to a Des Moines and their autoloader spewing super heavy shells was debated. Finally, for the Northern Parliament, we have to mop up a few post-war AA cruiser designs. First is a series of designs under the MLK series. These were small, with thin protection and standard speed for a cruiser. Their armament centered around either 130 or 152mm dual-purpose guns. Of note were the 130s, which carried 8, 10 or 12 rifles in twin turrets, or the most powerful version, 16 in these fuck-ass double-stacked quads. And for the final is Project 84. If the Sverdlovs were the last all-gun cruisers built by the Soviet Navy, the 84s were the last designed. These 5 planned ships would have displaced roughly 14,000 tons, armed with 8 new 180mm dual-purpose guns, supplemented by 12 100mm dual-purpose secondaries. Everything else was pretty standard light cruiser fare. All work on these ships were halted when Nikolai Gerasimovich Kuznetsov was removed from his post as Commander-in-Chief. Given that had happened in 1955, a full decade after the end of the war, these might be a bit too modern for AL. But since the point of this video is to show off as many potential candidates as possible, I'm leaving it in. As for the Dragon Embraer, you already know. Their cruiser force was small and ageing during the time period this game pulls from, and their big naval build-up came after that. They're really only getting a mention because someone will comment asking about them if I don't. I also don't know a whole lot about the Chinese Navy in general, so maybe there's something I'm missing. And there we have it. Another future UR video in the books. Every class or ship that could be joining our fleet as an ultra-rare cruiser. This one wasn't intended to be made for a few more videos, but I got the itch to make it, so here it is. Sorry top 5 events, you've been delayed. So, do you think I missed any? Any that shouldn't have been on here? Let me know. For now though, I'm gonna bounce. So as usual, fair winds and following seas.